Hey everyone, how we going? I'm a friendly tree, or Nick, and I'd like to welcome you all to an episode of AFT's Dialogue. Today I want to talk about fatigue in fighting games. And now this is a term that I guess it is kind of broad because it depends on the situation, whether I'm talking about within a single match, within a single day, within a single week, month, year, whatever we want. So I'm going to take it slow. I'm probably not going to cover everything that I want to cover, and I'm sure you all will have a lot of input on the matter too, as we all get fatigued when we play this game in different ways. So, I guess what I want to talk about is decision fatigue. That's the main thing I want to talk about. So, we play the game, and it's a well established thing, not only in fighting games, obviously, but it does apply to fighting games, that as you play, the longer you play, the more tired you get, and we develop something called decision fatigue. So let's say you've had a day of playing games, playing Tekken for whatever reason, whether it's an offline or online or practicing or whatever. You're probably going to find near the end you're getting a bit frustrated, or you're probably not playing as well. And it's because although you might feel okay, mentally you're getting tired, and you're no longer able to make your decisions as quickly as you'd like to, or you're making poorer decisions because of the fatigue, because of how tired your mind is getting from how much you're having to focus. Um, I like to think of it as we've all got this bar of mental stamina that we put toward things. So let's say you're playing Tekken and you're using a character that you're not too familiar with. You have picked up Yoshimitsu. Oh, great, good option, good option. You've picked up Yoshimitsu, and you've spent a bit of time in practice, and you're now playing a match. What do you need to focus on? You're new to the character, so you need to think about your own move list. You need to think about what sort of move you want to use, what sort of scenarios you want to do them in. So you've got to think of your move selection in your own move list. Um, and with someone with Yoshimitsu, like for an example, if you're trying to, let's say you're punishing a move even, are you going to use down forward 2, you're going to use hop kick, are you going to use crouch dash 1, are you going to use sidestep 2, there are a lot of different options. You also need to think of your move list, you need to think, are you in a stance, are you out of a stance, what are your options in this situation, you're having to put effort into that. Then you also need to think of the move list, you need to think of frame data, so you need to think, is it plus on block, is it minus on block, should I attack here or should I not? Then we need to think about the opponent's move list, and we need to think about the opponent's frame data. Alright, so we're already getting into a ton of things right there. Then we also need to think about our technical input. So for example, if you're not familiar with Yoshimitsu, suddenly you need to do crash dash 1, crash dash 2 inputs, go into kin stance forward 2, kin stance back 2, 1. You're having to get used to these different technical inputs that you may not otherwise have to do. So you have to think a bit more about that. Then you need to think about your spacing and your movement in general. That may be, as you're newer, it may be focusing heavily on doing backdash cancelling. Depending on the character, it may be doing crouch dashing, wave dashing, different stance cancelling things. So your movement and your spacing. Then we need to think about whiff punishment. If the opponent whiffs a move, you've got to think, can I punish that? What should I be using? With Yoshi, should you use a crouch dash 1? Should you use maybe just like a forward 1 plus 2? Maybe a back 2 2? You've got to think about that on the fly, don't you? As well as that, you've got to think about just other movements, so like sidestepping, and you've got to think about the stage positioning. You've got to think, is there a wall near you? Is it an infinite stage? Is it a wall break, a balcony break? Where are you? Are you at an advantage there? So on and so forth. Sorry guys, I've run out of fingers and thumbs here, so we're gonna stop doing this part of it. But then you need to think about, not only that, you've got to think about unique character interactions. So can you block this? Can you sidestep this with your character? How do you punish it? So on and so forth. Then you need to think about your opponent's patterns. You need to see, after they do a down forward 1, what do you do? So on and so forth. Then you need to think about conditioning. What have you got them doing with regards to patterns or habits? Then you need to also focus on resources such as your health, your rage, it might be your meter, it might be stances. And then you need to think about other things like how long is the match going on for? Is it a tournament? Is it a first to 2, a first to 3? Is it a first to 5? Is it a first to 50? It all makes a difference, doesn't it? It's a lot. A lot of things you need to focus on. And if we think about the mental stamina that I was talking about, imagine there's a bar and you can put this much toward this, you can allocate this much to this, and you fill up the bar. And then as you go on throughout the day, your bar of mental stamina slowly becomes less and less. So you've got these 20 things, 20 very tight, tough things you need to focus on during a match. What do? Especially as your bar's getting smaller. Something's got to give, right? What can we do? And then we've got the other point of external factors. So those are all factors within the game you need to focus on. But then you might be thinking, what's the person behind me saying? What is the commentary on my stream saying? What am I going to do after this match? What's for dinner? You've got other things running in your mind as well. So there's a good chance that even if you have this bar of mental stamina, you're not putting 100% of it toward what you're doing at that time. So that becomes even more challenging. Then you get frustrated. And if you get frustrated, you lose focus or you fixate on one thing. So you may have this certain amount of stamina allocated to a different task. Then you get frustrated and suddenly it's that down hop kick that they're using in this situation. And that takes up a lot of your stamina. And suddenly everything else goes out the window or a lot of other things go out the window. It's tricky. There's so much to focus on. And if your stamina is getting low, if you're having trouble focusing, man, we sound like a video game character in ourselves when we talk about stamina, don't we? But that's where we need to figure out what we're going to do in the short term, in the long term, whatever. So what I'm talking about, I suppose, is just in the short term in general. In the long term, it may be that you're getting into bad habits, your mental stamina bar, you're focusing on the wrong aspects, or you're losing because you're not prioritizing spacing and movement, or you're not prioritizing using the right tools, or you're forgetting your move list, or you're not focusing on the right things. You may not have the right resource management or the combo awareness to do the right combos in the right time, or the right punishment at the right time. We need to figure out what we can do in the long term, and sometimes that may be taking a break, or sometimes that may be practicing. So the other thing to think about is with this stamina, with these difficulties, it's not like every single thing, not like all 20 million things all have to have the exact amount of stamina allocated to them, do they? Depending on the match you're playing, depending on the situation you're in, you may not even need to focus on whiff punishment, very unlikely, or you may not need to focus on resources because you're playing a character that doesn't have resources. I mean, very few do in this game, do they? It's more the 2D characters that have a sort of resource, or Leroy with his cane. And then you may not have to focus on stances depending on your character. You may not need to focus on multiple types of launches or multiple types of whiff punishes depending on your character. And a lot of that's why a lot of people say, someone like Jack may be more tournament viable. You see a whiff punish, you're more than likely going to do a down forward 2. They do an unsafe move on block and you know it's a launch, more than likely going to do a down forward 2. So on and so forth. Or Mishimas. So people always talk the joke about, block really unsafe move. Mishima player does 1-1-2. 1-1-2 it's easy to confirm. It's a good fallback, like for muscle memory. You can really focus, you can really reduce the need for mental stamina for move selection and punishment by doing this 1-1-2, which is quite a universal option for a lot of characters, including Steve, Laura, Kazuya, Heihachi, DiaLOGue, Kazumi. I know I'm missing someone. Oh, Bob. Yeah. So that can be a good way to reduce the amount of stamina you need to use by finding ways to negate or not have to allocate as much to another option, and that can make things easier. Another thing, as well as just doing that, is practicing. So, for example, the more familiar you become with a character, the more familiar you become with their move list, the more familiar you become with move selection. the less you need to think about your frames and your situational frame advantage. The more you play in actual matches, the more familiar you become with spacing and movement, depending on the matchup. And then the more often you replay scenarios and situations, the more familiar you become with different conditioning and different habits. And that can help a lot. But the more you play as well, the more you can develop bad habits, and that's where you've got to focus appropriately. A lot of the time, I think what you need to do is you need to go into practice mode. You need to practice combos, you need to practice your spacing and your movement. But then what you need to do is you need to take it into an opponent, whether that's the AI at first, or whether that's straight to just another player. Best is another player, but you could start with the AI just to get familiar with doing things on the fly, and if they do an unsafe move, you practice punishing it. And you can just overly focus, put your mental stamina against the AI more toward focusing on movement and move selection and stage positioning and things, opposed to looking at character unique character interactions or other things like that, or focusing on how long the set is and conditioning and things, because you cannot condition the AI. They don't work like that, sadly. So that's a good way you can do it. So in other words, to help with your mental stamina and the risk of fatigue, the inevitable fatigue, you can try and look at how you allocate things, and you can try and make it so you don't have to allocate as much to a matter. I mean, once again, 1-1-2, it's a good example. You don't need to allocate stamina if you're using 1-1-2 to punish everything. Or you don't need to allocate stamina toward punishing if you're using a down forward 2 for everything. And down forward 2 is a very common option for... It's funny, I'm going over all the characters that don't have them. Down forward 2 is a very common option for a lot of characters in this game. Or down forward 1, I guess. But yeah. So, down forward 2 or up forward 4. You don't have to think as much if you've got that go-to option, opposed to thinking, do I use A, B, C, or D? So that's a good way that you can really improve your stamina. The other thing, I guess, is, like I said, it's as you play during the day, your stamina depletes, and you need to figure out how you can improve that. And you know what? Some of the best things you can do are sleep, rest, take a break, have some food. I remember learning a long time ago when I was studying, people talked about different types of foods you should have for exams and sports and things like that. And I mean, I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't have the best answer here. But generally, if you're going to have a long set, you'd want to have some kind of low GI food. So low glycemic index, so it means that the carbohydrates, the sugars, are absorbed slower over a long period, opposed to a high GI where it goes into your system instantly and you get that sugar rush, as they call it. So you want like a slow release throughout the day so that you can maintain your energy and not just go high and then crash and burn for a long day. Now I guess that really applies for like tournaments or events and stuff. So yeah, don't underestimate the power of food. Likewise, rest, taking breaks. You don't need to have your mind racing, thinking about it the whole time. If you play a match, you don't want to sit there and dwell on the match afterwards and use some of that mental stamina focusing on something that's already happened and may not help you later on in that set. Maybe take a mental note, maybe write it down. That's a common thing we tell people to do so that they don't have to focus and try and remember as much. Write things down so you don't have to allocate some of that stamina toward remembering a scenario for later, unless you think it's going to come up very soon in the day. Okay, so I think that's... I don't know, I've sort of jumped from short term to long term, haven't I? But for the short term, I'd say, look at how you can prioritize these things. And in the look at how you can prioritize these things and don't dwell. Figure out what you need to focus on the time. If you are learning a new character, you're going to have more to focus on. Likewise, if you're playing in a new environment, if you're playing with a new peripheral, like a different pad or a different stick, if you're playing with or without sound, if you're playing in a noisy environment, there are all these different factors that can can really affect your stamina and make you fatigue more quickly. So it's worth keeping these things in mind and figuring out how you can allocate your energy and your efforts appropriately. I honestly do think the best thing you can do is figure out how to become more familiar with things and make it so you have to allocate less energy and less effort toward these things. But it's tricky to do, I realize. And yeah, make sure you take rests. Exercise, living well, these, eating healthy, living well, these things do help you in the long run. So it's good to be a healthy person. I know a lot of gamers don't have that mindset of being a healthy person. We sort of sit around, we've got a sedentary habit, sedentary hobby, and we need to balance that out with a more active hobby such as a sport or some kind of physical activity anyway. That's the physio and me talking there. What else do we need to talk about with this? Really, I think it's just about making sure that you don't burn yourself out. Don't focus too much on different things and figure out how you can allocate that stamina. I'm becoming a broken record here, so I think that's where we're going to stop. Anyway, guys, I'd love to hear what you guys think on the matter of fatigue in fighting games, because everyone gets fatigued. Everyone needs to take breaks. Everyone gets frustrated, and often it's because you know what you want to do, but you're not capable of doing it because you're juggling a million things in your head, and you don't know. You can't react fast enough. You can't do things fast enough, or you can't focus. You feel like you're losing focus. So let's figure out how we can allocate our efforts effectively. Please comment. Let me know what you guys do to manage fatigue. Let me know how long can you play before you start identifying that you're fatigued. Some people it might even be just 20 minutes. Some people it might be 20 hours. 20 hours is pretty rare though. I'd be very fatigued by then. I reckon about the 3-hour mark is when I start getting very fatigued. But obviously when I'm streaming and stuff, when I've got the chat going and I'm trying to talk, I'm trying to reply to things, I do fatigue a lot quicker. And that's just the nature of it. Anyway, thanks for listening everyone. Take care, and I'll see you all next time.